All right. Hi, Lily. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So, let's see. I'm looking at your bio here. You're an author. Your new book is called what?
The Throwback List.
The Throwback List. Okay. And it also says on your bio that you are a librarian or were a librarian.
Yeah, pre-pandemic, I was an elementary and middle school librarian for about 10 years.
Okay, but you don't do that anymore?
I'm in a brief break. Hopefully, I will be able to get back into a library soon.
Okay, well,
I do miss it quite a bit.
it looks like you're sitting in a library with all your books back there.
Yes.
I got to ask you something about the library. Now, this is going back a long time, but they used to categorize books with something called the Dewey Decimal System. Is that still how they are organized in a library?
In a school library, yes. Dewey Decimal kind of fell out of favor for public libraries. Some of them use a more general category system now. Some of them use Library of Congress. But in the school library system, we definitely use Dewey Decimal. I taught all of my students how to find books based on Dewey.
Because that's the one I remember as a kid at my school library.
I've taught lots of kids how to use Dewey Decimal. I really like it as a way to be able to say, like, oh, you like, you know, sharks, go to 597. You like fairy tales, you go to 398.2. You know where to go. That's great.
So the books are categorized by genre?
In Dewey, they're very like particularly set up so that um, every sort of category you get from religion is 200 and um, human affairs is 3. So you sort of progress through categories based on the numbers. But fiction is always sort of by genre. And so some libraries, like public libraries, decide to take that into nonfiction as well. And so instead of numbers, they just say like sports and like it's fine. It just requires less memorization on the part of the patron. But I like how specific Dewey Decimal is.
How many books have you had published now?
The Throwback List is my fourth published book, not counting like short stories in anthologies, which aren't wholly mine.
What do you think about all of the various genres that we have these days? Because, again, going back to when I was growing up, there was like 5 genres, and now there's about 5,000 of them. Do you think that's a good thing, or do you think it's not so good, or what?
I think it's great. I think like Dewey Decimal, it's really specific. And so you can look at, fiction, science fiction, I guess what, romance, westerns, your sort of basic categories. But then you want to drill down into like, okay, but what if you want romance that only takes place with, vampires? Well, then you get into paranormal. And then so within paranormal, you might want only monster. So then you get monster paranormal romance. And so it helps you find exactly what you're in the mood for. I think that's fantastic. And it means that we get a lot of different, we get a lot of diversity throughout the categories so that it's not just like, well, this is, Asian American fiction. Well, just, regular fiction, historical fiction, science fiction, fantasy. We want to be as specific as possible because then you get more books. And as you can tell, I always want more books.
Well, I guess my concern is maybe not necessarily from the consumer's angle, but from the author's angle, because typically authors have to sort of stick to one genre, don't they?
I think in the past that was probably true. Nowadays, we're seeing a lot of authors sort of crossing into different genres. I'm completely guilty of that myself. Before the Throwback List, which is contemporary new adult sort of crossover fiction, my last book was a very dark horror comedy for young adults about zombies and witches. And so if I could only ever write in the one category, some of my books just wouldn't exist. And it's nice to be able to jump around a little bit more And so when you have the very specific categories, then your readers can look and say, oh, okay, it's the author I like, but they're doing something new. And maybe if they like it, I'll like it. And it can kind of introduce you to new categories.
Well, that's a good point. I was just thinking, though, like somebody very famous, like Stephen King or David Baldacci or somebody like that, who all of a sudden, if they wrote a book that was completely out of what they normally write, if their publishers would have a heart attack, because they would
Yeah,
think, oh my God,
I'm sure they
you know.
would. Stephen King, I mean, that's where the Richard Bachman pen name came from, right, in the 80s. But when Stephen King was like just sort of becoming who he is as like the number one author of the world, he wanted to write stuff that was a little darker, a little grittier, a little angrier. And so he started publishing under the name Richard Bachman, and some bookseller went, oh, I know who that is, and sort of outed him as, oh,
Oh,
that's just more Stephen King. And so now all of those books also have the Stephen King name on them. Um, but yeah, I think that it does get harder. The bigger you get, the more successful you are, it does get harder to pivot away from what people expect of you. I think kind of the nice thing about being a newer author and what we call mid-list, sort of, I'm a working blue collar author. You can jump around a little bit more, and you don't have millions of people going, oh, I thought I knew what to expect from you. People are a little more willing to go along for the ride when you try something new.
it's funny that you say that he got outed using a pen name. So his style must be so, recognizable that there's no way he could write something and people wouldn't know it was him. I think that's funny. I mean, that's like music in a sense, that your style is so ingrained in you that there's no way you can fake yourself, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Stephen King thing is funny because he started publishing the Richard Bachman stories were things that he'd written when he was younger, so like things he wrote in high school and college, and people still were like, no, that's Stephen King. They just still recognized it, even though obviously his style had progressed and grown, and it was still just like, no, there's just something, when we talk about like author voice, it
Yeah.
sometimes it is like that specific. It is like a fingerprint of like, no, that's you. That's how you see the world.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your book and your writing style. Your book is called The Throwback List. Give us a quick synopsis of it. What's it about?
Sure. The Throwback List is about three girls, Joe, Autumn, and Bianca. They're all in their mid-20s, and they end up back in their hometown after college for various reasons. Joe finds a bucket list that she wrote in high school in her childhood bedroom, and looking it over, she realizes that she can't tick off a single thing on the list, that she spent the last 10 years so focused on work and school that she sort of didn't make any time to have the sort of silly fun that she had anticipated would be what her life would be like. And so she enlists the help of her high school best friend, Autumn, and Autumn's new best friend, Bianca, to help her go through every item on the list. And they're going to tick them all off, no matter how ridiculous they are.
Give me one example off the list.
Sure. The first thing on the list is to TP to toilet paper the house next door, which happens to be Bianca's house. And so, Joe, who is 26, in the middle of the night, just takes all the toilet paper out of her parents' house and decides that she's gonna, TP the tree in front of the house next door, which is sort of this random act of vandalism that makes Bianca wonder what she ever did to deserve getting TP'd.
And these are all women that are in their 40s now or something?
They're in their mid to late 20s, so
Oh, okay. All
they're
right.
still young and foolish.
I think you can get away with that if you're still in your 20s. Once you hit 30, if you start TPing houses, I think you have
Yeah, someone's
issues.
just gonna call the cops. That's yeah. It was a very different situation.
Oh, that's funny. So, what made you write this book? Is this a true to life?
This is all purely hypothetical. My publisher is Hyperion Avenue, which is the adult arm of Disney's publishing imprint. um, Disney reached out to me and said, "Hey, we want to start looking at publishing these new adult crossover um, category books. Would you be interested in writing something for us?" And I really wanted to write something that was about female friendships and about how you make friends after college. I think for a lot of people, it's much easier to make friends when you're in school or in a workplace. And how do you do that when the only thing you have in common is the fact that you live in the same town? And so the bucket list was just the idea to sort of bring everyone together. This is an excuse to hang out, which is, I think, the most important thing about making new friends. It's like you need an activity you're all gonna partake in. Otherwise, it's easy to sort of not do things.
I'm not so sure that people, when they grow up into their 30s, 40s, 50s, how many of us actually still have a connection with people that we went to high school with or to college with? I think as life goes on, people kind of come in and out of your life. At least that's been true for me. I know one person that I'm still in contact with that I knew from high school. I know nobody from college and nobody from my last job. Do you have any connections with people that you went to high school with? Are you still in contact with them?
I do have friends that I knew in high school. We didn't go to school together. I grew up in a community youth theater program that I was a part of from like age 6 to 16. So a lot of people I grew up doing plays with are still my closest friends. And I think it helps that we didn't go to school together because we don't have that sort of like it's a very different type of connection to like go to class with people and the sort of day in, day out school dynamic. I don't know anyone at least I'm not in contact with anyone I went to school with. But yeah, I have a lot of friends who I knew as a younger person, friends I made when I was 12, 13 years old, I still talk to pretty frequently. But yeah, it's much harder keeping people from jobs and college classes. I think a lot of people, I would have friends while you were in those classes or at those jobs, and then you drift apart once it's over.
Yeah. Do you still live in the same town that you grew up in?
I don't.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
no. Um, and none of my friends do, which is really interesting. I, I grew up in the suburbs between Sacramento and San Francisco, and they were perfectly nice. No complaints, and yet no one I know stayed and lived there.
Yeah, people move around a lot more, I think, these days. And it's just the way of our society. However, there may be a turning back with more people going online working, that they might tend to stay home instead of relocate for their job.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. A lot of it, at least as a Californian, so much of where people choose to live is financially based. And so my hometown is, just a little bedroom community where people are commuting to one of the bigger cities, but still somehow manages to be very expensive. And so at the point where people might have chosen to stay, it was just too expensive to like get an apartment there. And so I think that's a big factor as to who stays and who goes, as to whether or not, like, can you move out of your parents' house and stay in the same town? Then maybe you will. But if you can't, then you're going to go somewhere that's more exciting if you're going to have to pay like a hefty sum every month.
Well, that's true. And I hope that with online, that we can get more people off the freeways and staying home, working from home. Not just, there's so many different factors, the economic factors, environmental factors, but also I hate commuting. I did it for 20 years, and I don't know of anybody
Likewise,
who likes to commute. It's just a
it's
nightmare for
miserable.
everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, I very much agree. My dad, when I was a kid, woke up at 3:30 every day to commute 100 miles one way and then do it again on the way home. And I never wanted to commute that long, and yet I still would end up, driving half an hour to get to like minimum wage jobs. Even when I was much younger and I worked for Starbucks, I couldn't work at the Starbucks in my own town. They were full up. And so I had to drive half an hour past 4 or 5 other Starbucks just to get to the one that I was making coffee in. And yeah, I hate it. I hate having to, especially be in that morning traffic. It's so dangerous. And as you said, just terrible for the environment. Not good for anyone's mental health either, but
No.
you just see all those cars on the road every day and you think, this isn't helping anything.
There is no positive thing from commuting. None.
No.
And I hope we can cut it down with people going online. I really do.
Yeah, and I much prefer making a difference in the community where I live. If I can work in my town, I feel like you make more connections that way. You feel more connected to the place you live, which is a lot of what the Throwback List is about. Is like, in the book, it's because they're so isolated. They live in a town where they can't really commute anywhere else. But just the idea that, okay, well, you're here. What are you going to do here? Like, if you get a job that helps your community, whether that's being a teacher or if you're, part of the local chamber of commerce, whatever it is, it's for your community. It's for people, your neighbors. And I think that there's something that we've lost about really taking care of the people around us because we're so focused on like, well, I work in the next county. I work 3 towns over. And so you come home just to sleep.
Well, I think on that note, we're going to have to wrap this up. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
I do. My website is Ms. Lily Anderson. That's MSLILYANDERSON.com. Ms. Lily Anderson is also my Twitter and my Instagram handle.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. Best of luck with the book. The book is out, I assume.
It is. It came out on October 5th, about a month ago. So it's out now. You can get it wherever books are sold.